Welcome. This is Greg Wagner, just giving a brief first lecture overview of CIS 121 Web Publishing. So for this class, basically we go over the basics of dynamic website design, which means making a website that's reactive to what users input and having kind of a more interactive feeling to the website. This class does not really cover the actual aesthetics of design. We'll cover that a little bit later in the semester, but not what the best practices are, but more kind of how to make the programming work, and then you should on your own be able to develop websites that kind of look and feel the way you want. So basically this class is broken into 6 parts. We'll go over website basics, so basically what is HTML, how to build a basic website, how to use a server, etc. What PHP is, then how to put MySQL, which is a database language to get data for your websites. And this will be kind of, first three principles will be the back end. Basically, how to design your website and how to make it run and look like it's supposed to, interacting with the server. And then the JavaScript, CSS, and HTML5, the last 3 parts of this class, which will be the last half of the class, cover more kind of the user side of the class, as in how to make your website interact with the users in real time in a way that's interesting. So kind of give you a basic review of how websites work is your web browser, which is called the client, and the client server protocol enters an address. So in this case it's called server.com, and so the internet, which uses a DNS server, will look up the IP address of server.com and then give you the IP address. The IP address will then be sent to the server. Now the IP address is the address that your computer, of the actual website. So we're basically looking at 2 different types of servers here. One's called DNS, stands for domain name server, and this gets the IP address when you request something. So generally your web browser, which is the way you interact with it, holds the IP addresses of websites. But if there's one you haven't gone to before, it's been a while, it'll look it up for you and then give you the IP address, which is the actual address. So I think this is kind of like the phone book. Say you're Googling something for hey, I want this person. This will give you the actual website, in this case the IP address of the website. And then it will look at the page you're requesting, and then it will get that page, and then the server will send it back to you, and then your browser will render the website. So basically, the server sends an HTML page, and then your browser looks at that and interprets it and runs it. So everything on this side is called the server side, which is what we're going to be basically going over the first half of the semester. This is how your product gets it. So in this class, we'll be using something called an Apache server. Now the Apache server is kind of the basic web server that many websites use. And then what's called the client side, which is your side, is the browser, which is used to view it. So your browser sends a request, and then you get it back as a web page, which your web browser like Firefox, Edge, Chrome, Opera, Safari render for you. Now that's the simple version. The more complex version, so what we'll be doing later in this class, is you get the web browser, you get the IP address, and then on your web server, it looks you still get a page, and then if your page contains a programming language called PHP, the processor on Apache, the PHP processor, will interpret your code and then render it. And if there's any SQL, also called SQL, on your program, it's going to get the stuff from the database and then get the data and then form the web page from the PHP processor and then display the page. So this is going to be this is kind of a lot more complicated than it actually is. But what we're going to be doing this first class is kind of going over the web browser stuff, and then later in the semester we're going to be going over kind of how to use PHP and how to program in SQL. And it looks really complicated, but it's not too bad, and the server does a lot of the work for you. So there's basically 2 things you're going to need to get for this class. other than a textbook, which I recommend you buying. And I'll have a link on the website and also in the comments of this YouTube video. But you need to get a good integrated development environment, also called IDE. As part of this class, you'll get Visual Studio. You should be having some licenses by the time you watch this video. And that's actually kind of an expensive piece of software, but I think it's fairly good. And then also, what you need to get is Eclipse. Now, Eclipse is another IDE. It's mostly for Java, but I'll be using it for the examples. And basically, an IDE allows you, it kind of helps you develop your code and kind of has some shortcuts for you. Basically, what I recommend is you get a Visual Studio if you can, but I'll be doing my demos in Eclipse for the videos. But in class, I'll be doing the demos in Visual Studio. And then also, you need to get an Apache server. So I recommend XAMPP. Now, XAMPP is a kind of it's a local web server that includes Apache. That's what the A stands for. MySQL, which is the database processing, the database we're going to be using. P stands for can stand for Python or PHP, and then the other P stands for Perl. And the X is kind of a filler for whatever browser you're using. So I recommend you get this, and I'll put a link as well. And so, but basically, you're going to have this dynamic web package that has the web server, your operating system web server, MySQL, and PHP. So if it has Linux, this environment is called LAMP. If it has Windows, it's called WAMP. And if you're using Mac, it's called MAMP. The examples I'll be using are in LAMP, but in class I'll be using the WAMP exampple. But if you use XAMPP, AML, the X in XAMPP basically means it can run on any operating system. And then I'll show you a little bit more on this in the demo in the next slides, but kind of as the basics for HTML. Basically, the three keys you're going to need to know is we're going to make an HTML page for this first assignment and for this first class. You're going to have these tags. Now, each of these tags kind of signifies a little thing. Basically, what the tags do is tell your browser how to render a page. So we're basically going to have three different tags to kind of start off. Right? HTML, which is going to surround everything. Everything's going to be with the HTML tag, and I'll show you what that means later. We're going to have the head, which contains basically like the kind of the housekeeping tags. So it's going to be the title. If you need to load in files for rendering stuff, that's going to go in the head. And the body is going to be the actual content. And if you want a good tutorial for this is the W3 schools. They have a lot of great stuff for HTML and also for JavaScript and other stuff going forward. But if you have any questions, please ask me in class or email me, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. So, for this demo, I'm going to create you basically a basic HTML page. Now, I'm using Eclipse for the browser. If you have any other questions, let me know in class, and I'll be happy to show you a demo using Visual Studio. But the first thing you need to do is just basically tell the browser what you're using. So I'm going to say you do angle brackets, exclamation point, doc type HTML. Basically, this will say, okay, I'm using an HTML document. And then for this, if you type HTML, left angle bracket, HTML, right angle bracket, and then if you're using IDE, that's what's kind of why I like using them. It'll automatically fill it out for you. So this is basically kind of the wrapper saying, okay, I'm using an HTML document for your browser to understand. And then basically there's going to be two parts you need to build. There's the body, and then on top of the body, I should have gotten this backwards, is the head. Now the head contains what's called meta information. This is information that the browser uses to kind of load files and stuff like that, like I mentioned earlier. So the main one you want to use in this is the title. Now I'm using all caps here for the meta for these things called surrounded by angle brackets are called tags, and then within the tags is called the property. And so I'm going to put the title property. I'll call this Greg's web page. And then what will happen is this will show up in your store, or show up in your your browser. So this is a local web page, and we'll go over later in class how to upload these onto the internet. But basically, you can view this in your browser. So just because my window size is so constrained, I'm going to right-click by say Open with Web Browser. You can see there's a web browser built into HTML. You can see my title is up here on the tab, and then this is actually where the location of my file is. So if you, in your web browser, you can actually load your, if you know where your files are located, you can actually load your HTML files, and it'll render them for you. So I got my head, my title. I'm not going to really put anything else in here, and then I'm to my body. And so in the body, there's a number of tags that you can use. So we're going to go over kind of the basics of the tags. So we have H1, which stands for header 1. I'll say, call this Greg's store. So for this class, we'll basically build a store throughout the few weeks. And then if I show with, actually I'll do web page editor. You can see on the lower half here is my HTML, and then how it's rendered in HTML up here. So I have Greg's store, and then H1 is the biggest one, and it goes down to H6, which is basically the smallest one. You can also do P, which is essentially the same thing, which stands for paragraph. But I'm going to do, so I'll do H6. I'll say something like, welcome to my store. And then you can fill these out with many other ones you want. So basically you want to put text in between these kind of H tags. Now this is kind of generic stuff. What you also want to do is, have links in there. HTML stands for hypertext markup language. Hypertext is basically links to other stuff. And so to do a link, if you do an A attribute and then or a tag, and then inside of the tag, if you do, you're going to give it something called an attribute. Now attribute is assigned to the tag, but it's not actually like a property. A property is going to go in this part. So the attribute, and I'll do, you want to put the location of where you're going, so I'll do http www.cnn.com, and I'll say CNN's website. And then I have a software company I'm running part-time, aside from working at Pima and at my other company. And so I'll call this something else. I'm going to call this, and my website is http www.snoozle.net. That's the name of my website, Snoozle. And I'll say Greg's website. And then notice here, this kind of shows you what the page is going to look like when it's rendered. So these are both on the same line. So if you want to go to separate lines, there's a couple things you can do. You can surround this by tags, so I can put this as a paragraph. And then by putting in a paragraph, it goes to the next line. And then I also have this one, so I have a couple paragraphs in here. And so you notice here I have a tag, but say you don't want that space. So a paragraph will have a line separation between each paragraph. So if you want to just do a line change, you can do br/. So if you have everything within the same markup language in a single space, if you do a slash it says it ends. Basically, let's say, okay, I'm going to go to the next line. BR stands for break. And so we have a head, a body, and then we have some tags. Now, if you want to add an image, so I'll do, it's img, and then I think of it, this is the tag is source. So it's going to be source and then the location of your image. So in here you can both put an HTML location or an actual image. In this case, I have an image basically stored in. I already have it in my Explorer under image. So I do image, and then let's see what I have in here. It refreshes. I just added this a second ago. Snoozle learning 300 by 300 logo dot png. I'll stretch this out just to make sure I got it. And then to make sure that I actually have it, I will right click and I'll say open with web browser. Let's see if it's still not coming up, so let's see what I did wrong. Oh, I spelled images, not image. So now let's try this. Still not coming up. What am I missing? So I have image. I can also just drag this in here. So let's see, what am I missing? So I have image, and then Snoozle, let's go to learning 300. I'll right click this. Just paste it in here. Learning 300 logo.png, and then open with web browser. And it's still not coming up. So the logo's not coming up actually in the actual web video, but I think it's just because I'm trying to get this at the top level and it's not quite finding it. But say if I do this. So having the slash in front of it means from the top of the web page, but if I do the slash here, it's from the relative location. And it shows this page coming up. So I don't like how it's over here, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to do BR, and so it's going to put on the next line. And then also you can adjust the size by type width. So it's 300 by 300. Say I want to make it a little more manageable. I do want it by 50 by 50. And it'll also do the relative size. So if you do 50 by 50, it'll scale it so that the ratios that change. The only way to specifically change is if I do 50 and then I do height equals 100, it'll stretch it out. But I'm going to leave it at 50. And so basically what you need to do for the rest of the assignments is make multiple pages. And then so I'm going to make another page. I'm going to call this about. I'll say contact.html. And then let's see, I'll open with, in this case, HTML editor. I'll open with web page editor so you can see me as I develop it. I'm going to make another, so I'll do doc type HTML, and then I'll do HTML, and I'll put the body as, or the head as, and I like to use tabs, just kind of indentation to make it a little bit easier to write. But you can actually change a lot of the stuff up here, and it'll still look pretty good. So I'll do title. I'll say contact. And the body, I'm just going to put in here email equals gmwagner@snoozle.net, and then save that. I'll kill this one, and then so I want to make a link to this. So I'll say this is my store, and then I'll say make another part, and I'll go welcome to my store. I'll say contact info, and then I want to make this a link, so I'm going to do -a href, and it's a hypertext reference, and I'll do, so in this case I can do relative locations. If I'm on the same level in the same folder, I can just do contact HTML, and then make sure to wrap this around it. So I have the contact information in here, and then I'm going to do another one. I'll do H6, I'll also do H5, I'll say links, and then within here I'll do H6, and I'll put all this stuff, I'm going to cut it and then paste it in here. And so this stuff is all kind of formatted. And so this is kind of the basics of making a web page. So what you'll need to do is make 4 other web pages doing this with relative links. You can also put other stuff in here. If you want to add pictures, you get a little bit extra credit. So I hope this video is helpful, and I hope if you have any questions, please ask me in the comments or ask me in class.